Hello, beautiful community. I hoped to be with you earlier today, but I recorded a tiny philosophy chat on the philosophy channel, and then I wanted to chat with you. And my health said, no, you're not going to do that. And I said, yes, I will. And my health said, no, you won't. And so I didn't. But I'm back. And we are wasting a lot of views today because I think today's video we could spend kind of a week or two making and put on the main channel, and it could be a record-breaking video. If this sort of thinking about compromat on Trump continues, which is the title of the video, the point of the video, if you haven't noticed what you're watching, we might need to do something on the main channel about it, but let's have a chat in a way that does the very opposite of what people would like, that makes it less sensational and less juicy. And what we'll do is ground ourselves a bit by reading a piece by the journalist and broadcaster Gabriel Gatehouse about the PP tape issue. And then I will give you a little bit of analysis that I'll make a little bit more of a public intellectual kind of analysis. So not exactly do they or don't they have anything on Trump, but really how does thinking about this sort of stuff well or poorly interact with our prospects of keeping our democracy, right? So the fundamental story is that as far as US national interest best construed goes, Trump's inebriation with Putin and Russia is a trap. John Gray called it a trap on the radio just in the last day or two. It's a trap. And just literally in the last week too, I was also proud of the language that Fiona Hill used when she said there is a certain sense she feels in which Putin and Trump are on parallel tracks in terms of political trajectory. And she even went as far as articulating what I call hyper-neoliberalism without naming it. She said, you know what, I didn't know how you could get from business to imperialism, but looking at Trump, I can actually see how you can get from one to the other. And you know that I tell us a completely unoriginal but important story about the propensity of neoliberalism under certain historical conditions to leak into what I call hyper-neoliberalism, where you move from giving a magical primacy to the market, from that to, in fact, giving a primacy to a kind of unbounded conflict of all against all. So eventually you get to a place where you don't just think you can buy everything, but you think that what you can't buy, you can just take by force or threats of force. That's hyper-neoliberalism. That's no longer just about free markets. So among the people close to Trump who are sane and are kind of out, or are not out because they are biographical commentators on Trump, like Bob Woodward or Michael Wolff, or Maggie Haberman, the assumption is, yeah, it's kind of worth asking this question. Do they have something on him? It's palpable that they've been asking it around. It's palpable that, Anthony Scaramucci takes the question seriously. Michael Wolff in particular takes the question seriously, but their answer is nah. But Woodward's answer is very strong no. I mean, let's not go there and be unserious. Among the expert community, the answer is absolutely no as well, amongst the Western Russia expert community. So you need to know that context. My answer is no, in the sense that it's completely unreasonable at this stage to think that they've got anything significant on Trump. So if there is any compromat, there's no recognition on my part that it's significant and is actually impacting the politics you're seeing. I think what's really going on is not just that Trump is enamored with Russia, that Trump has narcissistic submission, watch the main channel video if you haven't, toward Putin, right? That Putin is a central source of narcissistic supply for Trump, that they have an unequal and exploitative relationship in which Trump gets self-regulation from Putin, where Putin actually gets geopolitical change out of Trump. And fundamentally, health allowing, next video on the main channel, there is growing ideological proximity between Trump and Putin. Now, you might be noticing it here and there at the margins with attacks on the university, with attacks on all kinds of freedoms, attacks on all kinds of counter-majoritarian institutions. But how do you actually articulate this? What Fiona called parallel track. And I think there is a parallel track ideologically. In fact, I think it's one track. At least if you understand it in terms of family resemblances, is one track. There are very big differences between the Putin regime and Trump. Putin is not just an extreme version of Trump, but there are also sufficient similarities. We'll deal with them. So that's the stuff that matters, and that's the stuff that you don't want to miss. Why don't you want to miss it? We'll analyze it more properly in a moment, but you don't want to miss it because if you just outsource Trumpism to a foreign cause, you're going to lose your democracy, right? I mean, you already saw how the out-of-touch attitude that Trump is an aberration and that his base is largely irrational or malign or guilty of being victimized by some kind of malign foreign interference. You saw how badly that ended politically in November 2024, despite the fact that Trump was a very weak candidate who would have been beaten by a competent political program. Not a great political program, a competent political program. So what happened again in November, it's something we've been talking about. A lot of you have got pissed with me for talking about Trump being the likely winner for a couple of years. But we were heading there because there was no political project being offered as an alternative. So it's not a Trump victory in November. It's a defeat for the Democrats due to spectacular incapacity. I mean, they really entered a swimming competition and managed to get knee-deep. And that's why they lost, not because Trump's the greatest swimmer in the world. We're going to have great swimmers. We need to battle against them in the 2030s. They're going to be dogged, serious, hard-nosed, disciplined authoritarians trying to gain power in Europe and in North America. And unfortunately in Australia and New Zealand too. So we're going to have to go to anti-autocrat gym, right? We're going to have to go to the gym because at the moment we're pathetic, right? I'm not identifying with the Democrats here, but I'm saying that anybody who's an opponent of what you'd call the X-right, that is out to break counter-majoritarian institutions, has to take seriously the idea that what was offered is in historical terms just risible, right? Trump was easily beatable. So that's what you're going to miss if you just think Trump is a kind of a plant and that his supporters are simply stupid or simply brainwashed. Their mistake is not intellectual. If they are making a mistake, it's that they are rightly perceiving themselves to be robbed of political agency and culturally and economically deprioritized. But at the same time, they are opting for a vehicle as a solution that is in fact just a kind of an imploding tour de force of jagged arbitrariness. That ain't going to be a solution. Whatever problem you have, Trump ain't going to be your solution. So let's read the piece and then we'll react. I mean, this is the long haul. We're going to be 40 minutes, I'm afraid. Lost you, beautiful community. So let's read the piece now. There is a Latin phrase beloved of conspiracy theorists, cui bono, or to whose benefit. In other words, When something big or unexpected happens and you can't quite figure out why or how, you ask yourself, who stands to gain? For they shall likely be responsible. It's a beguiling maxim because it appears to provide a simple answer to complex events. And of course, it's been much in the news because of the kerfuffle with Trump and Zelensky. We'll just skip that bit. Ergo, to use another gratuitous Latin word, for Latin makes you sound clever, Russia must somehow be behind it. How? Allow me to reach for a Russian word this time, kompromat. Compromising information. We have a lot of kompromat on Mr. Trump. Enter the PPP tape. Or should I say, re-enter the PP tape. All over social media and conversations in pubs around water coolers, people are resurfacing the old theory that Russian intelligence has compromising material on Trump, material so damaging, so embarrassing, that he will carry out Moscow's bidding, a Kremlin agent in the White House. The story about the P-tape first appeared in the mainstream consciousness 8 years ago, in early January 2017. Trump won the election, something almost all pundits and media commentators had said was impossible. Yeah, fair, but kind of not. Yeah, a lot of mainstream media felt that way, but the more elite you get among political theorists, public commentators, the more public thinkers, some philosophers, the more it becomes 50-50 and maybe even leaning to Trump. I mean, I thought Trump would win. I was aware it was going to be close. John Gray thought Trump would win, possibly. Michael Sandel would have absolutely understood why Trump might win. I don't remember what he actually thought in the run-up to the election. So I would say that in my circle, social circle, and maybe in Gabriel Gatehouse's circle too, I would say I was at 70% of people expecting a Trump victory. So it's important to go by quality, not just quantity, when we talk about this. Anyway, and was preparing to take office, having won an implausibly, a race that was anticipated to go against him. 10 days before the inauguration, BuzzFeed published a bombshell, although it had been going around for quite a while before then, an intelligence dossier that suggested Trump was a Russian agent. At the heart of this scoop was an allegation so salacious that it eclipsed all others. According to the dossier, there was a video secretly taped some years earlier at the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow. It supposedly showed Trump in a room full of prostitutes performing an S-act known as a golden shower. Have you had any golden showers, beautiful community? Or have you given yourself any golden showers, beautiful community? They were urinating on the bed, a pee-pee tape. The Steele dossier, named after Christopher Steele, the ex-MI6 agent who compiled it, sparked legal and media frenzy. Was the new president of the United States really a Putin puppet? The race was on to try to prove or disprove the allegations of the dossier. At the time, I was working as an investigative reporter for the BBC. We put together a small task force of journalists with contacts in Moscow and in the security establishments in Washington and in other NATO countries. We'd meet in secret in the basement of a nondescript office block in central London that housed a company that provided security to journalists traveling to war zones overseas. We'd ring the buzzer, push our way past the piles of flak jackets and gas masks and go down the stairs. We'd lock our phones in a specially designed pouch to prevent eavesdropping. We were paranoid about our security. Were the Russians onto us? Were the Americans? We did our best to stand up the allegations of the dossier. I traveled to Kiev to meet a well-connected arms dealer. I flew to the capital of a NATO member state that I still cannot name to meet some very senior spies who might shed some light on the affair. A colleague went to Istanbul to meet a man who claimed to have actually seen the P tape. No such tape ever emerged. When Robert Mueller, the FBI director tasked with investigating Donald Trump's links to Russia, produced his report in May 2019, he found that Moscow had interfered in the 2016 US presidential election, but he found no evidence that Trump or the Trump campaign colluded with Russia, no evidence that Trump was a Kremlin agent. So we've got three levels, right, to the Russiagate story in 2016. Sort of hacking and leaking. Tick. A social media manipulation campaign. Tick. But, I mean, it was done so spectacularly, incompetently by the Russians. But tick. And thirdly, collusion. And there is no tick there. We don't have the evidence for that. And that's why the Russiagate story was so problematic for US political culture, because it eased off pressure on US citizens to look inwards to understand the Trump phenomena. And you already don't want to look inwards when things are going that wrong. You don't want to look at the domestic causes of this. You want easy solutions, right, which point out that what's happening is an aberration. You don't have to worry about it fundamentally. You just need to find what is the aberrant cause. So it was damaging. And then also just damaging in various ways I won't discuss now to public discourse. Let's go on. It later emerged that one of Steele's main sources was a Russian living in the United States, and that much of the information in the dossier was based on word of mouth and hearsay, or conversations he had with friends over beers. If there ever was a P-tape, no one I know of has ever seen it. So why has this obviously bogus story resurfaced now? And then Gabriel goes to give an account of it that is really neither his nor mine. It's just a generic, sensible, mature account of it. Let's quickly get through it, and I'll give some additional analysis I think that we need. People reach for conspiracy theories. Oh, you know what? I will say something here that's not very intellectual. There is another side to this. Experts who closely follow the Kremlin, whose life's work that is, would feel it on the Russian side. You see, if the Russians had something on Trump. And I mean, even I have a modicum of confidence about this, in the sense that I'm a public intellectual first and foremost. I'm not a country expert, but I have special insight, right, when it comes to certain bits of the world. And I lean into that, and I certainly lean against talking about other parts of the world I know very little about, like China. But, which is rare in our culture, by the way, the amount of unadulterated BS that experts in other areas who are not experts on China talk about China is a profound humiliation. But you get away with it because nobody knows anything about China. You can't quite bullshit about Russia in the same way as people don't quite go. Well, they do actually, to be fair, go there too. Anyway, so what is palpable to me, right, is that the Russians were in 2016 not looking for a Trump victory. They were looking for Hillary to be weakened by Trump contesting the election with her. They didn't really feel Trump could win, so they were surprised by it. They bought the New York Times BS that good Western experts didn't buy, right, that Trump couldn't win. Then in 2024, they positively wanted Trump to win. Famously, Putin came out and said he preferred Kamala Harris. He lied, even though there were some reasons why he may have preferred her that then were outweighed by bigger reasons that why he preferred Trump. And very roughly speaking, that's because Putin felt that most realistic case scenarios would lead to Trump working out much better for him than Kamala. He then thought that all the very best case scenarios were all going to be under Trump for Putin, not under Kamala. But he also did think that possibly some of the worst case scenarios for him, a kind of a 10% chance, could be under Trump too. So Putin was non-jubilant but clear in his preference for Trump in 2024. But when you look at the Russians, it's clear they're uncertain about Trump. It's clear they find him unpredictable. And it's clear, when you look closely, they're certainly not behaving as though they've got something significant, some significant compromise on him. So the more you know about Russia, the more suspicious you become about the compromat as well, actually. You become suspicious not just through paying serious attention to folks who investigated this, but you also get suspicious through the understanding of what's actually going on in the Putin regime. They're just not behaving like they've got compromat on Trump. Let's go on. Read quickly Gabriel Gatehouse's analysis, which is, as I say, nice, very nice, but generic, and then we'll jump with our own analysis. People reach for conspiracy theories, and they reach for conspiracy theories in times of turbulence, when events take an unexpected turn and appear to be running out of control. The 2016 US presidential election was one such occasion. But what is happening now is much more serious. Since 1945, the United States stood as the ultimate guarantor of European security. At the Oval Office meeting on Friday, so this article is a few days old, is reference to the ambush of Zelensky. And in the actions since, Trump has at a stroke signaled that he intends to pull the rug. America once promoted the twin values of democracy and freedom around the world. Brackets, admittedly a project with a spotty record indeed, but no longer. And of course, for all of that spottiness, and you might say that the spotty bits were actually arguably bigger than the non-spotty bits, but nevertheless, we're talking about a facilitation of a global order with a degree of stability. And Trump ripping it up so recklessly, as John Gray on the radio said, I think yesterday, is not realism. Here we're talking realism not in the Mearsheimer sense, but realism as in just having a sense of reality. It's not realism. It's not realism at all because of how reckless it is. If you're a realist, you proceed with a modicum of caution, no matter what your aspirations are. Why would Trump want to appear to align himself with Russia, led by an authoritarian kleptocrat who once worked for the KGB, the Soviet intelligence agency, and sworn enemy of the United States? There's another phrase, beloved of conspiracy theorists, that I think is quite useful in this situation: Occam's razor. This is a theory that the simplest explanation is the most likely. You don't have to imagine a complex plot involving spies and prostitutes and unusual S-acts. The truth is likely much more basic. Trump admires Putin. Right? I won't say anything here because we've made an entire main channel video about this. He has said as much on many occasions, calling him smart, savvy, genius. So again, I won't say anything. This is just Putin being conjured by Trump as an idealized object, and then Trump enjoys being in the glow of an artificially idealized object, Putin, which Trump has created and then welcomed into a sort of a fantasy society of his own. These are the epithets Trump would like to see applied to himself. Yeah, fair. In Putin, he sees a leader who has invaded his neighbor and is now poised to negotiate from a position of strength, and he thinks cool. In Trump's world, democratic checks and balances are for suckers. And here is the even more worrying bit. Millions of Americans agree with him, and that's really important. And I think Gabriel is somebody who really gets the grassroots Trump story. The people who voted for Trump believe that the country's unrivaled prosperity and wealth have been siphoned off, captured by a financial and cultural elite, credentialed elite, while their lives have been left to stagnate. And in many ways, they're not wrong about that. They believe that the promise of America has become a mirage hollowed out by a corrupt cabal. For many, America's support for Ukraine in its war against Russia has become a symbol of that betrayal, right? So some outsiders are privileged over us, right, by an elite that is evil in privileging outsiders over us, right? So complicity in support for Ukraine from that point of view is complicity in evil. Hence their hatred of Zelensky and their tolerance, if not admiration, for Putin. In truth, though, Trump has not created a new alliance with Russia. The more serious point is he's broken the alliance between the United States and Europe, an alliance based on common interests and values that's kept the peace for 80 years. America, for now at least, operates according to only one set of interests and values, those of Donald Trump. Well, and the ideological materials, I think, that sustain Trumpism, about which we'll talk. So we have a crisis of comprehension of agency in the contemporary world. By agency, I just mean who does what and how and by what mechanisms, right? We often talk about this as the problem of politics appearing opaque to people, right? We've talked about folks feeling unsafe, folks feeling powerless, folks feeling betrayed, but an even more important sort of emotional expression of the deformation of trust is when people feel that they look at politics and they can't make any sense of it. It's like a game of several sports blended into one without any real indication that you can make sense of the rules of the thing you're looking at. And if the thing doesn't make sense, why not throw eggs and tomatoes at it? And so by an agency comprehension crisis, I mean that we're all collectively, now Trump voters are ahead of us perhaps, especially the most magnified ones, but Trump voters are not alone in this. We do have a general problem of agency comprehension. So what do I mean by this? I don't mean that agency in our world is more complex, that our politics has become more complex than it used to be. It's roughly no more complex than it was 20 years ago. I don't mean, though that's true, that our world is more disordered than 20 years ago. And so agency isn't more complex, but it's certainly more jumbled. And nor do I mean that we've become dumb or stupid to follow the agency, in political action properly. What I mean is that smart people have become bad at tracking agency. And this is really important. Because it means that we risk sliding into depoliticized thinking about politics if even really smart people among us can't follow this thing properly and begin having magical thinking about politics outside of cause and effect, and begin thinking just in moral terms or just in aesthetic terms about politics instead of thinking about politics politically. It's not just Trump voters who are in the dynamic of depoliticization, thinking about politics non-politically. Many Democrat voters are in the same dynamic too. And it's rarely the case anyway that there is half of the population that are responsive to certain social pulls and pressures and pathologies, and the other half isn't. It's rather more likely that they're all responsive, but that one half is responsive in a particular way and that manifests particularly, and the other half is responsive in a different way and that manifests yet differently, right? Trump voters are deluded about political institutions. Anti-Trump voters are deluded about Trump voters, right? So this is important. But what is always a sign of a crisis isn't when dumb people behave in a dumb way, but when smart people behave in a dumb way. When smart people find smart ways of evading reality, rather. So with all of these questions, have we become superficial? Have we become dumb? The answer is no, we haven't. Human psychology is universal, actually, in many dimensions. It's expressed very differently in different cultural circumstances, but there is no such thing as humans becoming stupider overnight. In historical terms, a decade or two is overnight. There is no such thing as humans becoming superficial overnight. What there is human beings coming to live as though they are superficial, or human beings coming to live as though they're not intelligent, even though they are. So we have an absolutely jumbled sense of political agency as a culture. And that wasn't the case 20 years ago. It just wasn't. It just wasn't. And it's interesting that, a quarter of a century ago, I was doing my first university degree. And I can say that university students today at elite universities have a much more jumbled sense of reality than they did 20 years ago. So something is going wrong, and this isn't a question of us becoming dumber. And so you see where I'm going with this. We don't want to stop ourselves from talking about PP tapes because it's funky fun. And I don't want to stop you doing that, just like I don't want to stop you about talking about Putin's doubles. But we do need to be careful that we don't drift too far in the direction of just not thinking about the political phenomena that's in front of us and that we actually want to defeat. So, let's just focus in on this a little bit more. What if Susanna in Brussels wakes up, goes for her breakfast coffee, crosses the road, and thinks to herself, oh yeah, they definitely have all of that compromat, and then she comes back from work, has dinner with friends, and they all giggle about the, potential sources of the compromat the Kremlin have. What's wrong with that? Funky fun-wise, nothing. But if that sort of thinking spreads too widely across your relationship to politics, then let's focus in on this. The first thing that's wrong, right, is that you externalize a domestic problem, that you see a new phase of history that you're permanently stuck in now as a kind of aberration that will resolve by itself, about which you don't need to do anything, right? That's the first risk, right? So my channels began with letters from friends saying, Vlad, your plan to bring out some academic philosophy books first and then begin speaking to the culture. Do it the other way around. Your health story is complex, but do it the other way around, because it's helpful to have extra resources there for making sense of what's happening to our democracies, because the stuff that's happening is just not making sense. It doesn't just look like it's going badly, it looks like it's not making sense. And so what we don't want to do is sort of exacerbate our capacity to not be able to think clearly about the politics in front of us. And we have great capacity here for wishful thinking. And we want to be careful about it. And the wishful thinking just says, this Trump story is weird and it's an aberration, when in fact it isn't. Trump is an early onset story. Trump is an early example of the kind of politics that is coming our way and is going to fully sort of unwind its wings in the 2030s. So you've got to get serious about this. So that's one thing, right? You don't want to be blindfolded and sleepwalking through losing your democracy by thinking that, what's happening is caused by things quite different to its real causes. And the second thing, you just want to be tethered to the practice virtue of truthfulness in a democracy. Democracies don't survive without that. And you contribute much more constructively to public discourse and, quite frankly, to your own mental health that way. Now, and the same applies to our thinking about Putin. It's got to be realistic because you have to know our enemy properly, especially as it's on the same ideological track as us. Now, specifically about conspiracy theories, this is worth saying. The primary psychology of conspiracy theories is that the thing that really matters is the thing that you can't see, which is why it's really difficult to give evidence to conspiracy theory adherents, because the very point of the conspiracy theory psychologically is that if you can see something in broad daylight, that can't be the thing that really matters. And what I'm trying to say is that this kind of wobbliness about agency in politics and all the deleterious consequences of it is prone to feeding a conspiratorial way of thinking about the world. And you can see shocking conspiracy theories in the magosphere, shocking conspiracy theories in much of the post-truth populist right in Europe. But of course, you also see conspiracy theories in the pro-institutional political forces, whether left, right, or centrist. And partly what we're talking about here is a version of a conspiracy theory, which is to say that if you fully nip in the bud malign foreign interference and you tackle disinformation properly, you're going to fix something like the Trump phenomenon. It's going to go away. But the problem is, it's not a disinformation issue. It's not a foreign interference issue. It's an issue of a crisis of trust. The mistrust lies below the disinformation. Right? Much of what you see in public discourse is an attempt to swat disinformation as though intellectual error were the cause of it. It's not. Primarily, distrust comes first, disinformation comes second. And that's not understood in the way we battle disinformation, actually. And what we don't understand is that fundamentally we've run into a very difficult problem where for many citizens there is legitimately a conflict between a sense of political agency and truth. Truth is asphyxiating to a lot of citizens' perception of their political agency. And that's not an intellectual mistake. It's social forces, economic social forces, cultural social forces, political social forces, untethering of social bonds, the state of social media, economic deprioritization tied to hyperglobalization, ideologies of self-realization of various kinds that are not compatible with sense of public good and solidarity, many things actually constitute social forces that make many citizens feel that the only way they can gain political agency and not feel like they're nothing politically is by asphyxiating the truth. Because if we don't asphyxiate the truth, it'll asphyxiate our sense of political agency. Now, is this psychotic? Yeah. Psychotic thought, as we discussed on the main channel, is when you find reality unbearable to the point that you need to destroy the world in your own head. But we have social forces pushing citizens into that kind of thought. This requires compassion, right? Not screams about irrationality and malign foreign interference. And there is also something else, I think, that's really important for us here. And that's that the shock of the new is really great for a lot of people. It might even be greater in the United States because the United States is a baby country whose history begins with its birth. So it's especially hard for Americans who are pro-institutional, constitutional Americans who despise Trump, to grasp how it's even possible that this is happening. In Europe, because we have a history that predates the modern world, it may be slightly easier for us to realize that democracy could just be gone tomorrow, and that's bad, but in historical terms, a version of normal. Because the United States is sort of born in modernity, there is no pre-modern history of that country as a political entity, a unified political entity. So it's harder for the United States culturally to deal with historical contingency, to admit historical contingency. So the shock of the new is big for everybody, in Europe, in Australia, in anywhere you want to name, but it's worse, I think, for US Americans. Now, the point is that we've got to start reckoning with this to become effective citizens. We've got to start reckoning with the idea that Trump is an ugly orange early onset version of the sorts of stuff that our historical moment that will last decades will be throwing our way. So Trump is the future, right? Trump is the normal. You're stuck in an old historical moment. You're refusing to give up if you don't think Trump is the normal historical fare that we're going to get. Now, we can defeat this stuff, but we won't defeat it if we pretend that we're stuck in the bay and ready to go out into admit that we've been drifted out into open ocean. Because we need to realize that we're being drifted out into open ocean, realize that we don't have to sink, that our vessels are resilient, and we can deliver some reasonable defeats to these authoritarian folks. But that means having a sense of reality, which means back to PP stories, funky fun, please, but don't let it go so far that it obstructs your capacity to engage with political agency constructively. I'm getting a call through from the ranting police telling me off for this video. So I'm going to say lots of love and bye-bye.